Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast with Dr. Jessie Mahoney
and Dr. Ni-Cheng Liang.
We are physicians and leaders who are also trained in coaching, yoga, mindfulness, and integrative medicine.
We are also mothers, spouses, sisters, daughters, aunts, and friends.
In this podcast, we share candid, heart-centered, loving, science-based, thoughtful, and often fun conversations about the challenges life throws at us.
With our collective experience of over 30 years in physician and personal wellness, we reflect and offer pearls of wisdom for navigating life's challenges with more ease.
From parenting, marriages, money scarcity, cancer survivorship, uncertainty, challenges in practicing medicine, we cover it all.
We invite you to refresh your perspective and empower yourself with mindset, mindfulness, and other well-being tools that actually work. A quick reminder that nothing in our podcast is medical advice.
Today, we are going to talk about compare and despair.
Do you compare yourself to others? Feel like you don't belong? Feel lesser than?
In groups, do you feel like you are behind or not measuring up?
The intention of today's episode is to discuss comparitis, otherwise known as the compare and despair mentality, and to offer some solutions.
We hope to inspire you with the possibility that your brain can learn to not make comparison or feeling less than an issue. In other words, we hope to help you finally let go of this expensive habit. And if that's not possible, at least start to show up for it with loving amusement.
So we'll start with a simple grounding practice. If it's safe for you to do so, inviting you to close your eyes or lower your gaze a few inches in front of you. Begin to settle into this moment. Noticing the support of the ground beneath your feet. The support of whatever you might be sitting on or standing on. Leaving everything that came before and is to come at the door, giving yourself permission to fully be present for this episode together. And as you're ready, blinking open eyes, letting the light back in.
What is the biggest waste of time? Comparing ourselves to others. This is one of my favorite pages of The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy. And this episode has been a long time in coming. We think that comparing ourselves to others helps us and pushes us forward to work hard and achieve more. But more often than not, it gets in our way, slows us down, blocks our flow, and makes it harder. Compare and despair leads us to shame, frustration, and less growth than we otherwise would have. Why? Because it releases cortisol, releases stress, norepinephrine, and the brain science of that means that we are less creative and more reactive, more tired, more burnt out, and all the other things. What if we could change that? That's what we're hoping to share with you today, at least some ideas. Let's start, though, by talking about where does this compare and despair, comparitis habits come from?
Comparitis, compare and despair is not your fault. In modern society, there is a lot of pressure to conform to what is perceived as norms and to be accepted. There's also an intrinsic underlying default wired network in our brains that implants our fear of rejection as being othered and outside of a group or our tribe. So it definitely isn't our fault, but it doesn't serve us, right? All of those default cultural norms is not really necessarily helpful for us in this 21st century era.
It's also a deeply rooted practice in medicine culturally. And in medicine, we are taught very, very early on to look around in the room and compare ourselves to others and figure out what we need to do to keep up. What do we need to do to fit in? And if you go back to our early training, even in medical school, you had to fit in like a chameleon on every team, in every small group. And if you didn't belong, you might not succeed. And so that is where a lot of that fear of rejection comes. If you didn't get along with, belong, fit in, and be seen as part of the team on literally every team, the story was at least that you would not be able to proceed in your training. And in an effort to accommodate that, many of us lost who we were and the good parts about ourselves as well in this pursuit of what for most of us was a dream, and in this pursuit of what for most of us was bringing good to the world. And yet it had this compare and despair side effect that then grows and grows and grows over time.
One source of triggering this compare-itis, compare and despair mentality is social media. And I will be vulnerable and share about my journey with compare and despair. And it's an ever ongoing journey, and I'm working on it, but I'm proud and happy to say that I've definitely made some progress with lots of years of work. So I used to broach what I saw others on social media, what they were offering, especially in the physician wellness space, particularly if it was related to mindfulness, threatening to me and somehow encroaching on what I erroneously dubbed my turf. I noticed emotions of jealousy and envy, and also a sense of defeat. Like, I have way more experience than this particular person or group of people, and yet they sold out their retreat or their class. Like, what? And I haven't filled my offering. So, in the past, my automatic default thoughts were, what am I doing wrong? Which then prompted more courses, more learning, more training to try to get better, to offer more. And frankly, it was exhausting and detrimental to my health. And I felt very out of alignment. All of this stemmed from scarcity mentality. Also, that my ego was feeling threatened and I was in reactivity mode. But luckily, through coaching and self compassion with mindfulness practice, and I also want to give a lot of credit to my time on the board of directors with the Center for Mindful Self Compassion, with honing and planting and growing an abundance mindset that is learning to settle in. I say learning because that scarcity mindset has been with me for so long and it's not entirely gone. And I accept and allow that it's inevitable when it pops up. But now I own my own agency to respond to it with tenderness and care and abundance when it shows up. So I'm going to share something that Kristen Neff shared with me a while ago about how she broaches compassion programming. So she is, I would say, the pioneer researcher in the self-compassion space and compassion space in the world, I would say. And as many of you know, there are so many different offerings in the compassion space from all around the world. And she told me that all of those offerings, all of those experts were many different doors that led to the room of compassion. So all of those other offerings, all of those other teachers are simply different doors to the same room. And I thought that was a beautiful metaphor. And so it applies really nicely to the physician wellness and mindfulness spaces for me. And so I've reframed it so that more doors mean more people can have access. And isn't it a wonderful thing that so many people want to bring mindfulness and physician well-being to so many others? And it's also a fact that I can't do this alone, and that we, you and me, Dr. Jessie Mahoney, cannot do this alone.
Yeah.
And in order for a cultural shift to occur where the healers are supported in their healing journeys from the get-go and then throughout every stage of their journey, society needs a lot of experts and healers to join this cause, to feel safe and empowered to shine their light. And so now my pre-post mindfulness, self-compassion, and coaching training, when compare and despair arises now, I get really curious without judgment. I get self-compassionate. Where is this coming from? What's the story that I'm telling myself? And oftentimes the story ends up being intertwined or laced with a lot of self-judgment or judgment of whoever or whatever I'm comparing to. And then I go back to the room metaphor and ask, is this other expert a door to the room of what I offer? And more often than not, it is. And then joy and happiness set in such that more healers might seek their own healing. And we're all part of the same team. That's an important reminder. We're all part of the same team trying to improve the healthcare space ultimately. And I like to think that we're all also trying to make the world a better place than when we grew up, than we were in training, for instance.
And I'm thinking back to training, we are actually on the same team. Many of us who we trained with end up working on the same team or working in the same hospitals. So we might work together caring for a patient in the future. And yet the setup of our training and the setup of our culture is this competitive, not on the same team. And that has a tremendous cost. To reflect on something you were saying as well, when you were describing your abundance mindset, which could even be a neutral mindset, just getting out of the scarcity of there, is a limited amount of people searching for mindfulness. When you started to talk about all these doors to the room and all the possibilities, your brain goes out of that blame, shame, and guilt. And I immediately started having this sort of lightness within, like a body sensation of all the possibilities and what else could we create? And I wonder, who you might collaborate with and how all of these things could work together. And when you get into that mindset, we get unstuck. And so a lot of where we get stuck is this compare and despair. This person has already done this thing, comparing ourselves, and they're way ahead of me. So therefore, I shouldn't even try. We don't like to think of it that way, but that is a bit the impact. It grows our imposter syndrome. Many of the things you mentioned in what you described were also solutions that we talked about in the imposter syndrome episode. And you talked about the doors to the same room, as different speakers talking from a different lens. They're all doors towards physician wellness. And it reminds me a bit of some of the relationship and marriage coaching work. Just like you, these other people want to make the world a better place. Just like you, they want to help heal healers. And boy, in the world today, we need more and more people attending to that issue. So my own journey with compare and despair is a lot of similar. What I think of, to share some different components of it, for me, it's also was a lot of business, compare and despair. And I want to point out that when we're doing something new that's uncomfortable, that maybe is outside of our, outside the box in our life experience, we are already feeling vulnerable. And so you are more likely, when you feel vulnerable, to go into compare and despair. And so that's why for both of us, I think around business, especially since both of us have really been running our own businesses for the last 5 years or so, but before that, not. Of course, where brains will go to compare despair around business decisions. And for me, potentially looking at other people's business and saying, wow, they're doing this and they're doing that. And what is it I should be doing? And Where might I be falling behind? It's very much that medical mindset, which is very much not in alignment for me and not in alignment for my business whatsoever. And so I have spent most of my business trying to not go into compare and despair. Not from a willpower standpoint, but how can being mindful, how can being curious, as you mentioned, how can asking different questions? So one of the things I ask myself now, well, first of all, I pause and notice how I feel, because if you don't even notice that's what's happening and you just react, you can't do anything about it. But I will pause and notice and say, I wonder what I can learn. Is that a good idea? Does that fit in with my business? This way to, is doing a big conference something that I want to do, for example? I tend to do small things. It's like, is there anything in that I might learn from? Is there someone there that might be the perfect person for me to collaborate with? Or again, I often try to say, what can I learn from this? As opposed to holding my breath and feeling the stress and anxiety and shame, blame, and guilt and scarcity mindset. I love that you brought that up, because compare and despair is a blend of scarcity mindset, imposter syndrome, blame, shame, and guilt. It's all of those things, feelings of inadequacy, many of the things that we bring up all the time. I think it also tends to come up around your children. And I just wanted to point that out. Many people, we think that our children are a reflection of us, and we compare and despair how someone else's children are more successful than ours. And then we catastrophize and go down all of these rabbit holes. So compare and despair also has consequences of triggering other unhelpful thought patterns. And triggering our sense of inadequacy again. And the children one, actually, just like the business one, they are very personal things. They're really deep passions and desires and things that you love and care about that you've really almost birthed both of them. So we tend to be much more sensitive to compare and despair in realms like that. The other thing I wanted to bring up is this idea of comparative suffering, which is a little bit different than compare and despair, but I see it with a lot of people struggling with, I'm struggling more than you. And it's very rampant in the medical culture about how difficult this job is, or that job is, or this call situation, or that. And we're not really trying to compare, but we are in comparative suffering and sometimes collective suffering. It can go either way. But I want to bring that up because I think that is one of the most expensive things around this compare and despair. I'm going to compare how much I'm suffering versus they're suffering, or flipping it against yourself and saying, well, I'm not suffering quite as much as they are, so I should be grateful and not feeling the way I'm feeling. We use this compare and despair to dishonor our own insides. And so I just want to begin the podcast acknowledging that both of us have had so much compare and despair in our lives. The other tool that we didn't think about or haven't talked about yet, and I don't think was even on our list of things we might want to share, is something we shared around imposter syndrome, which is connecting to each other. And you and I, whenever we find ourselves triggered, it elicits either a phone call or a long text conversation to ease the discomfort. I'm going to say every single time I reach out. And so having another human who you trust and you can be vulnerable with, and when you sort of share your concerns, you immediately can have loving amusement for yourself. Wow, here I go again. This is why this was triggering for me. And so noticing it and reaching out for help and connecting with another human and recognizing that this is the human brain. We're always scanning to see where we might fall behind or where we might not fit in or where something bad might happen. That's what we were trained to do. It doesn't mean that you don't fit in. It doesn't mean that you've fallen behind, and it doesn't mean that something bad will happen. It's just a habit, and it can be useful. And so it's really what you decide to do with the information. That's the powerful place forward.
So compare and despair being a habit, it is potentially a really well-worn groove of really efficient neural networks that have been set up and revisited for decades of your life. And so we are offering some solutions that might help literally change up that neurocircuitry. And I'm so glad you brought up the reaching out and connecting aspect, because that is an automatic way where our brains can step out of that such well-worn path, neural circuitry laden compare and despair mindset.
And the power of that reaching out goes beyond the brain because it changes our physiology. It changes us from the fight or flight, I'm alone and terrified. We now have a partner. We tend to have that oxytocin release of connection and community, and your physiology actually shifts, which makes your brain much more able to work on its neural circuitry and change things. And so our solutions we want to share come from mindfulness and coaching, of course, because that's what we talk about here. But they come as future focused things we can do to have a different path forward. Many people spend a lot of time on therapy trying to untangle old habits. And what we talk about here is about, okay, we have these deeply rooted ruts of compare and despair. What do we want to do with them from here forward? What would a different path forward look like? And so one of the first solutions that I found in this area actually came from the pandemic, which was Zoom yoga. And I bring it up, one, because it's funny, and two, because many people reached out to me and said, I just love that I'm doing yoga with you. I've never done it before, and I've never enjoyed doing it in the studio because I thought everyone was looking at me and I didn't do it right. And I just didn't, my triangle didn't look like their triangle, and I couldn't do this pose and I couldn't do that pose. And Zoom yoga gives me the freedom to practice and learn and grow without anybody judging and without comparing myself to the next person. And so, number one, what a gift. And if any of you haven't done yoga, try out Zoom yoga in that realm. We might think, well, I haven't done it, so I can't do it online, but it's a gift to try it. And it's a very different experience. And so I love the idea that we're all in our own little boxes, having our own experience. And so Zoom in there is this protective cocoon that keeps you out of compare and despair. And you can begin to practice not feeling that way. And I often talk about what you practice grows. So we've practiced and honed compare and despair, but doing yoga in a Zoom box, you can practice and an alternative reality where what you're doing is exactly what your body needs in that moment. And there is no right or wrong way to do it. And that brings up another thought about compare and despair. A lot of it comes from the fact that we are deeply attached to a right and a wrong way. In our society and in medicine in particular. So if there's a right way, we think that what everyone else is doing is the right way, and what we're doing must be the wrong way. And we don't actually know that. I had someone, we are recording this, or I'm recording this from Sagrada, and it reminds me that I had someone here, I think it was last September. But anyway, what she said struck me and has stayed with me since. She was a very slow and mindful eater, and she had always thought that that was wrong, that somehow, she was always finished 10 minutes after everyone. And what she said is, what I've learned this week is that just because everyone else is doing it doesn't mean it's right. And so that is a beautiful way out of compare and despair, to remember that just because everyone else is doing it doesn't mean it's right.
Another solution that we offer is to ask good questions. So I'm going to offer some good questions when compare and despair comes up. So giving yourself a moment of mindfulness, of noticing that it's here, and letting go of any judgment when it arises, and then getting curious. So what is arising from an emotion standpoint? Knowing that when we name, we can tame. So before we get into like a fight or flight or a reactivity automatic reaction, we can name the emotions that are arising to tame them. So asking the question, oh, what is arising? And for instance, if envy or jealousy are arising, can we actually use that as a clue, as some data for what we actually want?
A reminder to listen to our podcast on jealousy is a clue to desire.
And then another offering for a good question is, am I comparing their curated image, their outsides, to my insides? And that automatically is not a fair comparison. And so if we catch ourselves doing that, we can hold ourselves with tender, loving self-compassion and realize that it's not a fair comparison. And it's an expensive comparison when we compare our insides to someone's outside's curated image.
And that's actually what happens most often on social media, for one.
Yeah.
So just a reminder that social media is everyone's outsides, and we have no idea what's happening on the inside. So the next spot I wanted to touch here is that very often we think the solution is, I'm just not going to do it anymore. I'm going to put my blinders on. I have hear a lot of people saying, I'm just going to stay off of social media because I don't want to go into that. That might be a solution for you. It might be a gift, but it might be that you actually want to develop tools such that you can move through the world and practice moving through the world without comparing and despairing and judging. And so not resisting the reality that your brain does this, noticing it, and rather than white knuckling it, I have to stop doing this, having deep compassion for yourself that this is what humans do. It's a deeply rooted pattern. Of course, you're comparing and despairing. We were raised pretty much to do that. And in a capitalist society, that's a huge part of our society. A lot of the minimalist movements and simplicity movements are an effort to step out of compare and despair. And stepping out of compare and despair is stepping into your own authenticity. And so rather than not making an issue, putting blinders on, making a blanket statement, I'm no longer going to be on social media, can you actually begin to think about who you are authentically? What are your strengths? What is your flow state? What is your true essence? And I often share that I am conflict avoidant. And so this is my way around the struggle. And I find it for me is like stepping into the flow of the river instead of swimming upstream or literally trying to build a dam in the middle of a river, which the compare and despair mindset is a bit of a rushing river for most of us. And so can you focus on what is special or unique about you? And I wrote this blog post a while ago, which I was reminded of when we were thinking about this topic. And it was about green juice at the farmer's market. And could you be sort of the best, most perfect green juice? When you have it at the farmer's market, it's delicious. And they have a very specific recipe. And your farmer's market in San Diego is going to have a different recipe than mine in San Francisco. And how do you want to be? Like, what is your essence? And this came up because, yes, there are different green juices and we can compare them, but you can also decide that you're going to be the best green juice, which is a very different recipe. And there's all kinds of facets of it that are uniquely you. And so I love this idea of green juice because there's a little bit of sweet, there's a little bit of delicious, there's a little bit of healthy, it's beautiful, it's colorful, it's interesting. There's all kinds of things. And so the thought is, can you be that best version of you? And green juice might not be your thing. I like it because it feels very aligned and authentic for me. And so I think just realizing that we can own and honor and celebrate why we're different, why we're unique, and why we're delicious. And just focusing on that can shift your focus away from the compare and despair. So what you pay attention to is your reality. And so pay attention to you, pay attention to what you want to grow, what you're good at, what your strengths are. We are always looking at what our weaknesses are. How can I improve them? But what if you grew from a strength-based growth? So what is your juice analogy? And what would you like to tap into, focus on, or enjoy about yourself? What strengths do you have? And what might happen if you grew those?
Here's the other analogy about the room. So another question is this person or this offering leading to a room where I hope I or others can be? And if compare and despair arises about someone's looks, about where they're going for a vacation and how much fun they're having, and whether or not, as you had brought up, their kid is doing something better or being something better than your own kid, or there's a whole host of other reasons that there could be some trigger, remembering that everyone has a right to post and share, and we really can't control the actions and thoughts of others. So we can't control what they post and what they share. But we can, however, engage in our own self-care. And any combination of all of the above tips. And I will actually say and call out that you can use the limiting our exposure to our benefit, but knowing that it is a temporary solution. It's kind of like a band-aid in the moment. And you can also unsubscribe. So we had a prior podcast about unsubscribing. So could you unsubscribe with intention as opposed to trying to just put blinders on? So unsubscribing with intention because whatever is being posted is not in alignment for you, and you don't feel like engaging in that particular exchange, or you simply want to do something that's kind for yourself. There is some utility in saying, I'm going to unsubscribe, I'm going to unfollow that. And that might, for you in that particular moment, be the healthiest response, at least temporarily.
You mentioned setting an intention, and I think that is very specifically focusing your attention on what you want more of. And using this brain science of intention can help you shift. It can help you focus and filter all the input in your world through that. So let's say your intention was peace. You might unsubscribe. You might not do the work to constantly work on your brain. We often think hard is better, and I'm just going to figure this out and not do it. You can unsubscribe. And what I want to point out here is we've offered two very different solutions, unsubscribe and or work on it. And I often think at different points in time, we are available and have capacity for different approaches. And so being kind to yourself and compassionate about where you are and what might work for you in this situation or that situation. So setting an intention can be really, really helpful in terms of how you want to move through the world, because without it, you react to what comes rather than moving forward with intention. The other thing is that you can set an intention for a space that tends to be triggering. For example, I was at an event recently, and this event had some things there that would trigger things for me about not belonging or feeling judged, and maybe some people there have said some things to me at some points in my life that I took personally, for example. And probably that's because of where I was in that moment. But what I thought about was, okay, well, why am I here? I had so many good reasons to be there and so many things that I wanted to get out of it. And for me, it's usually people I wanted to meet, connections I wanted to make. What is my purpose? And so connecting to that is your intention. I'm here to meet people. I'm here to find the couple of people who I'm meant to meet, meant to connect with, meant to help. And all of the other stuff is just background noise. And so when your brain starts to go rogue, you come back to, well, I'm not here for all the things. I don't have to feel totally comfortable. Reminder, I'm here to do X. Sometimes I'm here to teach yoga, or I'm here to share a message. I think even when we're giving a talk, you can come and say, well, do I belong? Our brain is always sussing out whether we belong. And by the way, in medicine, we were taught to notice how we don't belong. That was a protective mechanism. So we do it everywhere. And instead, it's like, what do I have to offer? If I don't belong, you can flip it. What might I be able to bring to the humans here? There are probably a lot of other humans who don't feel like they belong. And maybe something I have to share could be helpful for them.
So many potential reflection questions we offer to you. So in this series of questions, it's kind of like an exercise that you might want to try out the next time compare and despair comes up. So, without further ado, when does compare and despair arise? And then getting curious, why is this arising? What's the data that's here? A hidden or not so hidden want or aspiration? And could you allow and accept, just for the moment, that compare and despair is here, along with all of the emotions that are arising, to give yourself a moment of pause, a moment of self-compassion and mindfulness, asking yourself, how can I be kind to myself in this moment of discomfort? And then choosing. We've offered many different solutions that may work for you in different moments of compare and despair. What is my next best step?
Your next best step might be coming on a retreat. I love that intro. I couldn't resist. I also wanted to share that retreats have been an area for me where I have had some compare and despair. I began offering retreats very early, and now many people are offering many different kinds of retreats. And it has triggered a bit of, should I be doing something different? And so grounding into who I am and why I'm unique, what's my version of the green juice of retreats, has been a very helpful tool. I also notice on retreats, people come, mine are all small groups, but people always come in the beginning comparing and despairing. I wonder why they are here. I'm better. I have less problems or more problems. I don't belong. Always the first day. Everyone shows up that way because that's what our brain is trained to. And then as they work on their nervous system and we begin the coaching and they realize that they all do belong. And then they learn tools to step out of compare and despair. And it's such a beautiful thing watching people move through that process. So I do encourage you to join me on a retreat. It's an active practice in learning how to move through your life differently, whether it's untraining the triggering, whether it's coming up with powerful thoughts that can help you. It's really beautiful. Sometimes people have such a relationship with compare and despair and such a relationship with vulnerability that they really want to start with one-on-one coaching, and that's another option. So if that's you, notice who you are and own your authenticity and own where you are. In coaching, we just meet you where you are. And so one of the reasons I offer so many different things is that I love people can choose what works for them in that moment. And Nicheng and I would also love it if you consider joining us for Connect in Nature, which is the one retreat that we do together once a year. It will be at Green Gulch in September, and this will be the last year we're going to offer it at Green Gulch. We're going to change it up for fun. And Green Gulch is amazing, and Muir Woods is right there, and it's an amazing opportunity. So while I don't want to put you into scarcity, there is a little bit of scarcity because we're letting you know in advance that we're going to change it up. So come join us and learn some mindfulness techniques, learn some breathing techniques, practice your pause so that when you fall into some of these default thought patterns, you have all the tools that you need to move forward with more grace and elegance.
Thanks so much for joining us.
We encourage you to dive into the show notes for each episode for more learnings and resources.
We also invite you to take a listen to the many other Mindful Healers podcast episodes. And please share the podcast far and wide with colleagues, friends, and family.
If our message and approach resonate with you, we would love to work with you.
When you listen to a podcast, you consume information, but when you work with us, you can actually practice and change.
We offer coaching and mindfulness experiences, talks, workshops, retreats, and more. Connect with us at themindfulhealerspodcast.com.
The content of this podcast is not medical or life advice. We invite you to participate in the mindful moments we offer at the end of most of our podcasts, but please only do so safely. Welcome to this mindful moment offering. An invitation to close eyes or lower your gaze a few inches in front of you if it's safe for you to do so. Begin by noticing the point of contact between your body and the supporting ground or chair that you might be standing or sitting upon. Settling into this space, being open to the experience of this mindful moment, inviting you to place both hands atop your heart, pushing in just a little bit. And bringing to your mind's eye an image of you, your authentic self, and wishing loving and kind intentions upon yourself. May I be well, may I find peace, may I be happy, may I be free from harm. May I be well, may I find peace, may I be happy, may I be free from harm. May I be well, may I find peace, may I be happy, may I be free from harm. And thanking ourselves for taking the time to wish loving and kind intentions to ourselves, including ourselves in our circle of care. Now inviting you to bring up in your mind's eye a person or a group of people that you have experienced some compare and despair or scarcity mindset towards. Recognizing that comparisons are a part of the human experience. Normalizing that you're not alone in comparing ourselves to others, and that those that you compare yourselves to also want those same loving and kind intentions. And so inviting you to also send loving and kind intentions to those people that you have compared yourself with. May you be well. May you find peace. May you be happy. May you be free from harm. May you be well. May you find peace. May you be happy. May you be free from harm. May you be well. May you find peace. May you be happy. May you be free from harm. And sending some gratitude to them for being part of this practice, envisioning them alongside of you so that we can become this collective we with those same loving and kind intentions. May we be well. May we find peace. May we be happy. May we be free from harm. May we be well. May we find peace. May we be happy. May we be free from harm. May we be well. May we find peace. May we be happy. May we be free from harm. Taking a moment to notice what's arising for you now. Any thoughts, emotions, body sensations now that might be different for you compared to when we just started. Coming back to noticing the sensations of your hands atop your heart, the support of the ground beneath you, knowing that that's ever present. Thank you so much for practicing with me.